of this meeting. So just so everyone knows, these meetings will be posted, the recordings, so that you can look at them afterwards. In addition, any chat messages that are sent to the group will also be a public record going forward. So just want everyone to know that to start with. We love to have cameras on. So if you were able to turn on your camera, that is a super big help to us. We know sometimes internet capacity doesn't allow that to happen. We also know that sometimes there's other things happening in your life, particularly with schools, sometimes in session, out of session, that sort of thing. Do not ever worry about having a furry friend or a child join you, that sort of thing. We completely understand this COVID world that we are in now. So please don't be embarrassed about that. And so as we get ready to start, the other thing that is super, super helpful to us as your facilitators is if you wouldn't mind going up to your Zoom box and where you have the 3 little dots, if you could put in your pronouns, that's super helpful to us. And that way we won't misgender you or assume that because we think we see something, we are correct on that. That's just really a kindness for us. If you are an observer, welcome. We are delighted to have observers with us. If you wouldn't mind indicating that as well, that will help task force members not call on you, help your facilitators not call on you. So if everyone could take a minute, go up to the top and in the 3 little dots, put in your preferred pronouns. And if you're an observer, add that. And then Sarah, I will turn it to you to get us started. And delighted to have Sarah Course from Community Planning and Development, hereafter referred to as CPD, to kick us off as the staff lead. Sarah?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rox. All right, I will attempt to share my screen really quick. So just to confirm, you guys can see my screen?
Correct.
Correct. All right. Well, thank you. So again, I'm Sarah Course. I work with the Community Planning and Development Department in the City and County of Denver, and I'm the project manager for this project. So we are all here today for the first task force meeting for the Advancing Equity in Rezoning project. So thank you so much for being here. What will we cover today? Well, there will be 3 main components of the meeting. First, an introduction, kind of like what I'm doing right now, and then we'll move into an icebreaker just to get to know each other a little bit better. Then we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit more about the project framework so you guys know what the project's about and the schedule for it. And then lastly, we'll have some breakout sessions where we'll go into individual breakout sessions, have a discussion, and then reconvene as a larger group and have a larger discussion about the project. So why are we, the city, doing this project to update the rezoning process? Well, first we want to recognize that the city is evolving. Development and change is happening, and we have heard from community members like yourself that some improvements can be made, especially to the rezoning process. So another reason is that we also have citywide goals that need to be implemented. Back in 2019, we adopted new citywide plans that set the vision, priorities, and goals for Denver. These plans also provide guidance for land use and future development. So as we consider how the city is evolving, we look to our plans to see what projects should be prioritized to achieve our citywide goals, especially the goal of creating a city that is equitable, affordable, and inclusive. Another reason we're here today is that the rezoning process is a bit outdated. So the citywide plans I just recommended, they identified this project as a priority because the rezoning process, again, is a bit outdated. So there are more rezonings getting denied because of conflicts of outdated review criteria. There are more applicants having a difficult time navigating the rezoning process. And there's also more people showing up wanting to be a part of the process, but are just not feeling heard. So we need you to contribute to this project to provide your expertise, experience, and perspective. And we are tasking you with the responsibility to work with us to help answer the question of how should the rezoning process change? So before we move on, I'd like to recognize the members of City Council and Planning Board who are participating on this task force. We have Amanda Sandoval, who is the Councilwoman for District 1 in Northwest Denver. We have Stacy Gilmore, who is the Councilwoman for District 11 and is also the City Council President. We have Aaron Clark, who is a Planning Board member. And we also have Joel Noble, who is the Planning Board member and the current chair. So next, I'd like the project team to introduce themselves. Again, I'm Sarah, and I'm going to pass it off to Kyle to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyle Dalton. I'm Denver's Regulatory Planning Manager. Your project team experts are Sarah and her team. I'm just here to observe today. Thank you for joining us. I'll pass it off to Liz.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you today. I'm Liz Weigel. I'm the Rezoning Planning Supervisor, and I'm on the project team with Sarah, and today I'll be helping out with some of the breakout groups. Thanks again for joining us. And I'm going to pass it on to Andrew. You're muted, Andrew.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Liz. I'm Andrew Webb. I'm a senior city planner for community planning and development focused on rezonings and regulatory work. And I'm on the project team, and I'm here today to also to assist with some of the breakout groups. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Rob.
Hello, I'm Rob Haig. I'm a member of the project team, and I'm also one of the planners who reviews rezoning applications that are submitted to the city.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Ramsey. I am the Community Engagement Specialist for CPD. So helping out with community engagement and mostly outreach to more marginalized communities and populations. So yeah, that's my role, and I'm going to pass it off to Jenna.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenna Morton. I'm a communications specialist with CPD, and I'm helping to support regulatory projects, of which this is a regulatory project. And I'm gonna, I think, pass it back to Sarah.
Yeah, so thank you guys, and I'll turn it over to Rox to introduce their team and to move into the icebreaker.
Well, welcome everyone. We're so delighted to have you here. And as we go throughout this process, I'm your main facilitator. I go by Rox. You're welcome to try to spell Roxanne the same way my mother spelled it, but it's much easier if you just go by Rox. And we are delighted to be here with you. As your lead facilitator, a couple of things that we would ask from you. From time to time, we may make a mistake. We may do something that doesn't feel right to you. Please let us know. We have chat open. We will be looking at chat throughout. So please let us know there. You can email me. The invites come from me. So you've got my calendar, my email address right there. We want to make this process work for you all. And we love doing this kind of work with the city and other partners around the country, but only works if we meet your needs. So please feel free to give us feedback as we go along. And I am delighted on my team to be joined by Yvonne and Sabrina. So Yvonne, will you please introduce yourself and your role, and then Sabrina?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Miranda. I'm also with Strategy with Rox. I will be helping facilitate as well as do some of the community meetings and focus groups, also doing bilingual focus groups. So that, again, in the spirit of inclusivity and equity, feel free to let me know if you have any questions regarding scheduling. You'll most likely get that communication from me, and I'll pass it on to Sabrina.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina White. I am also a facilitator on this project. I also will do a lot of like the tech support, troubleshooting, things like that. So if you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to me as well. Great to be here and excited to start this project.
So great. We're now going to move to an icebreaker introductions for the task force members to get to know each other. And if you are here as an observer, please continue to do what you did, some of you did earlier, and just let us know who you are in chat. But for the purposes today of the icebreaker, as well as for our breakout groups, we're going to be asking for the observers to be in the observer role and task force members to be the more active voices and participants throughout the process. And this icebreaker is designed both to help us get to know each other, but also help us a little bit with technology. So Yvonne, I'm going to kick it to you for that.
Absolutely. So this icebreaker is called True of Me. Not sure if anybody's played it before, but the purpose is A, to create some community, and 2, to get to know these our participants, our task force members. So this is True of Me, Denver edition. I will go ahead and call on individual people's names. And what I want to know is, what is a Denver thing that you either enjoy or like, or is true of you? For anybody who that is also true for or resonates with, I will have you give me a thumbs up. For those of us that are new to Zoom, if you go down to your dashboard, there is a reaction icon. If you click on that icon, it'll give you the option for a thumbs up. This will also come in handy if you're new to Zoom. There's a raise hand option. At any time throughout this meeting, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. But for purposes of this activity, I will have you use the thumbs up. So I'll go ahead and start since I'm the one leading. My name is Yvonne Miranda, and I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. If this is true of you, give me a thumbs up. Wow. More than I expected. I'll go ahead and pass it on over to Alfonso.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. My name is Alfonso Espino. I am part of and representing the GES Coalition. And I guess, sorry, I wasn't ready for this excruciating mind game. I think something true of me is I really enjoy snow days despite the traffic, because I just love the snow that much. But I still hate the traffic. So I guess if that's true of you, I'm sure that's a lot of people could agree. And I believe Yvonne's going to keep passing it on, right?
Yes,
Sounds
I
like
will.
it's going alphabetical.
Yes. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval. And also remember that this is Denver edition. So make your facts true of Denver and how they relate to Denver.
Good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Sandoval, represent Northwest Denver, or as I like to call it, the North Side. So what's true to me is I love buying roasted chili in the fall. Roasted green chili.
How about Anna DeWitt?
Hey, I was actually just about to write in the chat. If you want to see everybody's reactions, you can go to the right side of the screen and click that gallery view so you can kind of see everybody. I love the Cherry Creek bike trail.
It's a good one. And Brendan Green? Oh, we have a question. Roxanne, you have a question. All right, Brendan Green.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brendan Green. I'm with the East Colfax Community Collective. And I have really been enjoying watching the Denver Nuggets during the pandemic.
Great. Brittany, I don't want to butcher your last name. Catalinas, please correct me.
Yeah, it's Catalinas. It's close. Thank you. Good job. Denver, the first time I moved to Denver was 8 years ago. And I'm from the Midwest, and everybody told me I should try the Lamar's Donuts. And yeah, I really like Lamar's Donuts. It's like the best place to get donuts in Denver. But now I just like came across Wake and Bake. I live in Baker, so I travel more down on the south side. Wake and Bake is a new fantastic donut place. So Midwest, we got a lot of donuts. So Denver, they did all right with the butter here. So good job.
Thank you for the recommendation. Everybody go try them out. All right, do we have a Bruce O'Donnell?
Hi, Bruce O'Donnell here, and my Denver thing right now might be that I'm sick of the sports writers in the Denver Post being smarter about the Broncos than everybody else in the world, and ready for the Broncos to move on. Thank you.
We're with you on that. All right, Caitlin Quander.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Quander. Anna, you took mine. Mine was going to be yours, so I gave you a big thumbs up for that. So I've switched it up, and actually the other thing we love doing as a family is taking the light rail downtown and kind of hanging out around Union Station, especially in the summer when the fountain is going. Our kids love to play in it.
Great. Claudia Folska.
Hi, I'm Claudia Folska, and what I love about Denver is the sunshine.
What is it, 300 plus days of sunshine? Gotta love it.
I'm sorry?
300 plus days of sunshine.
Yeah. And if I could add the beautiful snow, we have lovely snow. I just came back from Seattle where it's gloomy and snowy and slushy and mushy, and we have really good snow and great sunshine at the same time.
All right, Elaine.
Hello, everybody. Denver fact is that I recently moved here within the last year, so I'd be curious to see thumbs up if it's true of you that you've moved to Denver in the last 5 years.
I'm seeing one. Is only one person? Well, welcome to Denver.
Thank you.
Erin Clark.
Hi, everyone. So I couldn't thumbs up to the first one. I was not born here, but I was raised here from the age of 2. And so something true of me, a Denver thing, is that I am a proud graduate of Denver East High School. So I wanted to broaden it out to anyone else who is a result of a Denver public high school.
Whoop, whoop. Shout out to DPS. Flor Alvidres.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm also a DPS graduate, so I liked that one. Something true of me that I feel is very Denver is I had childhood birthdays at Casa Bonita.
Big facts if you were born here or raised here. Do we have Jean? Jean Fashow. We'll move on to Geraldine. Nope. Joel Noble.
Jerry's here, but is on mute.
Oh, okay. I got it. I go by Jerry, short for Geraldine. Geraldine's an awfully big name. What's true of me is I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. What's true of me is we've owned Plaza de Santa Fe Liquors on 13th and Santa Fe Drive for 38 years now. And I've lived in Capitol Hill for over 30 years, worked for the phone company. Now I'm semi-retired, but interested in this rezoning committee. I think it's going to be interesting to learn what the process is.
Thank you. It's Joel Noble.
Hi, everyone. When I leave Denver and come back, the thing that I am reminded to be grateful for is the low humidity.
That's great. Thank you. Kate Hilberg.
That's super not fair because that was mine. I think the other great thing is I'm actually originally from New York, and the thing I love about Denver is you can see all of our sports stadiums except for the soccer stadium from one place. And you can actually walk to all 3 of them.
How about Lindsay Miller?
Hello. The thing that is true about me is I went to grad school at CU Denver.
Go see you, Denver. Londell Jackson.
Hello, everyone. Let's see. There's what I don't know where to begin because everyone's taken all of mine, and Aaron took mine that I really wanted to say. Let's see. What's true of me is, and we have to do it Denver edition, yeah. Well, this will probably date me very much so, but what's true of me is I used to love to watch Blicky the Clown first thing in the morning before school. Hey, I'm not the only one.
You are not the only one. Thank you so much, Londell. Lou Raiders.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lou Raiders. I'm recently retired. So the thing that I really love now is being able to walk the park. So Cheeseman, which I used to drive by every day on my way to work downtown, and being able to go to Wash Park. So I love the Denver parks.
Thank you. Maggie Leah.
Hi, everyone. She, her pronouns. I am representing Mile High Connects. And wow, this is harder being, a lot of people have said good things. I love amusement parks, and I live over by Lakeside Amusement Park, which was a staple in my childhood. So anybody who's been to Lakeside Amusement Park.
Thank you. Maira Gonzalez.
Hello, everybody. Maira Gonzalez, representing I think in District 11, the Montbello Organizing Committee. I graduated from Montbello High School, where Robot Mike was one of our security guards.
And Monica Martinez.
Hi there, Monica Martinez. I run the FACTS Partnership, a community development corporation along the East Colfax corridor. I love Denver neighborhoods and how each neighborhood is kind of different, and I feel like you can go to each neighborhood and get a different experience. And I guess wondering if other people also like used to go to the other side of town. I used to go to the west side all the time, and now like I never go over there, all the way over there, the west side. And I think that's probably Denver's growth, right? So I always have to meet in the middle if I'm meeting people. It's like, no, we'll meet in the middle. You're coming over here.
How about Robin Wood Mason?
Hi, everyone. I would say that what is true of me in Denver is that we have this hometown America feel, but we're also connected to the international community, and that with DIA here, it's a hop, skip, and jump to be connected to anywhere in the world. And I love the flavor that that brings to our community.
How about Shara Smith?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shara Smith. I'm with the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. Pronouns are she, her, hers. And what's true of me about Denver is that I love the view of the city from Red Rocks. It's absolutely breathtaking, particularly at night. So if you haven't had an opportunity, I'd highly recommend it. It changes your perspective and certainly makes you appreciate, if you don't already, just living in this beautiful city.
Thank you. Councilwoman Stacy Gilmore.
Hello, everybody. What's true of me? I got my undergrad at Metro State.
And last but certainly not least, Steve Harley.
Hi, folks. Well, I've got something that's similar to a couple things that people have mentioned, parks, but I'm endeavoring to visit every Denver park property, and gotten to somewhere in the 140s so far, but that's not even halfway. But just to make it a little more fair, how about a thumbs up for anyone who's been to 50 or more? Oh, well.
I see a lot of head nodding. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that activity. I hope that helped develop a sense of community, that it got you hype about the city of Denver and our love for the city of Denver. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Roxanne.
Thank you, Yvonne. And it's great to get a sense of why so many of you love Denver so much and your roots in Denver, because as we talk about this process, we are so grounded in the work in Denver. And how do we have an amazing community where everyone feels like they have a role, and we hope to level some of the playing field. And so on that note, Sarah's going to move us through with the CPD team some of the work that is in front of us. So Sarah, and I would note as well that Councilwoman Sita Baca has also joined us. So always great to have additional participants. And thank you to all the observers who also put your comments that you were present in the chat function. Sarah and team.
Perfect, thank you. So again, I'm going to share my screen. And before I move forward, just have to double check that you guys can see it.
Yep.
All right, perfect, thumbs up. All right, so thank you so much for that icebreaker. Hopefully you guys got to know a little bit more about each other. Now we'll really dive into what this project is all about. So there are two plans that I want to discuss to start off with. So the first is the comprehensive plan, which is a 20-year vision for Denver. And it has 6 vision elements. And the first vision element is a goal for Denver to be equitable, affordable, and inclusive. So the second plan is Blueprint Denver, and that guides our future land use and transportation. This plan also identifies specific goals related to equity and improvements that can be made through the city's rezoning process to make it more transparent, equitable, as well as accessible. So this project, as well as all city projects, look to these citywide plans and aim to achieve their goals. So I pulled up some maps here that you'll see, and they measure what areas of the city might be vulnerable to displacement, what areas don't have good housing diversity, or what areas lack jobs diversity, as well as what areas might have less access to opportunity. So right now, there are various citywide projects that contribute to achieving the city's equity goals and strive to decrease vulnerability to displacement and increase housing diversity, jobs diversity, and access to opportunity. So for example, the expanding housing affordability project that's currently going on right now, that project is helping the city to become more affordable and improve housing diversity. So where does our project fit in? So the Advancing Equity and Rezoning project is just one piece contributing to the larger picture and one project progressing the city's goals. So let's talk a little bit about our work for community planning and development to understand a little more about what we do and again, where this project fits in. So our work can be broken down into 2 different types. First is the planning work. That's where our department works with the community to create different types of plans. These are citywide, neighborhood, and small area plans. These are all policy documents that set the vision and framework under which future decisions are made. So they guide our future decision and what should come for the city. So for example, these plans might identify intensity for development or the desire for more parks and open space. The second type of work is our regulatory work. This includes creating new or updated rules or regulations that inform land use and development. For example, they will inform and guide how tall buildings can be or what uses can occur within that building. I want to point out that one of our biggest tools in forming and guiding development is our zoning. So that provides a more prescriptive and quantitative approach to the city's built environment. So our project fits in as a regulatory project, which was already mentioned, and it's intended to help implement goals already identified in our plans. So we're taking what we've identified in our plans and we're trying to implement it and really create like, what are those new rules and regulations that we should have? So the outcome of this project will be a text amendment to the Denver zoning code.
Sarah, can I stop you for just a second? We do have some, and I know you said from the start you wouldn't be able to see chat. Would you like to take questions at the end or questions as we go throughout?
If we could take questions at the end, unless there's something that would be better addressed right now, you can let me know.
Perfect.
Okay, All right, thank you guys, and thank you for the questions. I'll finish with some of these slides, and then we definitely have time for discussion and questions. So we have staff that's also able to help answer questions while I talk in the chat. So that can also happen while I'm talking as well. So moving on, this project will definitely involve community engagement, and we realize the importance of community engagement as well. So I want to talk about our 5 goals that we've set up for community engagement. The first is about project and process understanding. So we want to make sure that we're educating you as well as the broader community on the reason for the project, the importance of participation and engagement, the process for decision-making, as well as the potential impacts of the project and the outcomes. So the second goal is diverse engagement. We want to make sure that we're engaging a broad cross-section of community members. The third goal is intentional engagement. So we want to make sure that we are engaging historically marginalized, underrepresented, and hard to reach communities, and also empowering them to have a meaningful role. The fourth goal is to build trust. We want to build trust with you, as well as all the participants, by creating a space to listen and to also address questions and concerns that you have. And then the last goal is to make sure that we're creating a feedback loop, which will be especially important between us and the participants of this task force. So what this means in terms of the feedback loop is we want to make sure that we're informing you and distributing accurate, objective, as well as timely information that's also accessible and understandable. We want to make sure that we're fostering an understanding of land use regulations, as well as an understanding of the rezoning process itself. We want to make sure that we're soliciting input and feedback to ensure key issues, interests, and needs are integrated into the process and project outcomes. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we're building awareness of how your feedback and the community's feedback is used throughout this project and how it informs outcomes of this project. So those were our 5 goals of community engagement. When we look ahead into the outreach strategy that we have in terms of what are those specific things that we'll be doing to engage the community, I'm going to list a few. This is not an all-inclusive list, but this just includes some major components of outreach that we have planned for this project. So starting at the top, for general communications, we will use our project webpage, newsletters, and social media to ensure that we're spreading information about the project. And we'll also use that to communicate updates and announcements for events and meetings. In terms of the task force, so you guys, we are planning to meet monthly. And then moving on to briefings. So because of the impact this project will have on City Council's work, as well as Planning Board's work, we will be doing frequent briefings and info items with them. In terms of broader outreach, we plan to do several community meetings and have other touch points such as surveys and things like that. And then lastly, for our focused outreach, we'll convene focus groups and have things like office hours to ensure that we're capturing a broader range of community members and hearing from everyone that's interested in participating in this project. So now let's talk about the schedule. So this project will be about a year-long project and will involve several different phases, starting with the kickoff, which we're here today, kicking off the first meeting for the task force. So then we'll move into analyzing and identifying the problem. That's where we'll really dive into what are the key issues that we're seeing. From there, we'll evaluate alternatives. So we'll start looking at what are the things that we can do to solve the issues as well as achieve the goals of the project, and as well as look at best practices and things like peer city research as well. Then we'll move into identify a preferred approach. So what is the thing that we need to move forward, iterate, and make sure that we're getting good feedback on to then develop kind of the final outcome. From there, we'll develop the tools. We use this commonly a lot in our department, but what we mean by that is we're going to develop things like draft language for the text amendment, and we're developing the tools that will eventually get adopted later on. From there, we'll move into the review and public adoption stage. So that's where we'll have the draft text amendment, rules and regulations, and we'll have a public review and eventually move through the adoption where the final thing will be a vote by City Council on whether or not to approve it. After that, city staff will move forward to implement the updated rules and regulations and ensure that we have the processes in place to really implement the project. So again, you will be involved in monthly task force meetings that will occur primarily throughout the first 6 phases of the project. And you'll help us by providing feedback and reviewing best practices, identifying key issues, and also refining alternatives and recommendations. As I mentioned, we plan to have community meetings, and more specifically, we're looking to have at least 3 community meetings, one in the spring, summer, and fall. And there will also be other opportunities, as I mentioned before, throughout the duration of the project for people to get involved. So one thing I want to iterate is that this project is about the rezoning process. However, to understand the rezoning process, we must first understand the role of zoning itself and the difference between zoning and what a rezoning is. So when we dive into zoning, zoning controls what you can or cannot do with your property, essentially, or what you can and cannot do with your zone lot. So zoning controls building height, as well as the general location of it, and other things such as parking. Zoning also controls transparency or windows, as well as things like entrances and other design standards that help inform how a building might look and feel. And then another major thing that zoning controls is the uses that happen within a building or on the site. So I want to point out that the majority or 90% of development that you see in the city and in your neighborhood today, that occurs under the existing entitlement or zone district. So it's something that's already allowed. But an example of this is, okay, for example, there's a property that has a 3-story building, but it's zoned to allow 8 stories. Well, that property owner can go ahead and build 8 stories because that's the existing entitlement and that's what's allowed today. So when we look on the flip side of it, 10% of development occurs after rezoning. So that means a property owner or developer pursues a rezoning so that something different can be allowed on the property or something different could be potentially developed. Even though a smaller portion of development occurs after rezoning, starting with updating the rezoning process is extremely important because it involves a public process and requires a vote from City Council. So that is what this project is about, updating the rezoning process. So that was a bit about rezoning. So then this is a bit about rezoning. A rezoning is the process of changing the zone district of a property. So for example, this property that you see here, it's zoned to allow a 2-story residential duplex, but they could rezone to allow a 3-story building with retail on the first floor or office on the upper floors. Again, a rezoning is to change the zone district of a property to potentially allow something different. There is a process for that and requirements, which is what this project will focus on. So when I think of what a rezoning process is, I kind of think of it in 3 different phases, which I'll describe to you. The first phase is the pre-application phase. This phase includes what happens before an actual rezoning application is submitted. So if you want to rezone your property, you would submit a pre-application, you would have a meeting with city planners, and you would also be encouraged to do public outreach. Then moving into the second phase, that includes everything that happens once a rezoning application is submitted. So again, if you're rezoning your property, you would then submit an official application. City staff would review your application and provide comments. And then we would also take note of public comments received, good or bad, all comments received. And then when everything looks good, then you might move into the final phase. And this final phase is everything that occurs during the adoption process. So that's when a city planner will then write a staff report. And that staff report summarizes findings of how the rezoning request either meets or does not meet the 5 review criteria. And we might typically make a recommendation. So after that, your application would then move through the planning board and city council public hearings. And finally, once at the city council public hearing, that's when city council will vote to approve or deny your rezoning request. So that was a bit about zoning and rezoning. Now let's talk about some initial goals for the project and what it will address. So throughout this project, we'll dive into the details, again, identify key issues and further develop the project goals. But right now we can say that this project will focus on 3 main things. So they are updating the rezoning process to make sure that it is transparent, equitable, and accessible for all. The second thing is to make sure that we're identifying rezoning review criteria that also inform better decisions and achieve citywide goals. And the third main goal is to look at creating requirements that respond to the varied equity impacts of rezonings. So these are the three kind of main goals we'll be focusing on. So looking at updating the rezoning process, evaluating and updating the rezoning review criteria, and looking at additional requirements that can maybe be built into the process. So that was a little bit about what the project will do and the goals for it, but I also want to call out some things that the project will not do. So in case if you're worried, the project will not rezone anyone's property, including your own. And unfortunately, the project won't change the rules for zone districts, or it won't stop development. And lastly, the project won't change the role of city council as the voting body on rezonings. There are other things the project won't do, but I just wanted to alleviate your concern in case you thought we were going to rezone your property. So looking ahead again at what the project will do, it will focus on equity. When we think about what equity means for this project, it could really mean a lot of different things. And we want your help to also think about that. So some things that we think about is that equity may mean creating a more transparent and understandable process. Like, do we have understandable requirements for a rezoning application? Or do we need to better communicate what the rezoning process entails, or how people can voice their opinion on a rezoning? Equity may also mean incorporating meaningful notification and awareness of rezonings. So for example, do we need to change who gets notified of rezonings and how? And equity could mean providing different opportunities for engagement. For example, do there need to be other ways community members can engage in the rezoning process? Or equity could mean calibrating the rezoning fees. For example, should we have different fees depending on who applies for a rezoning? So those were just some examples of what equity means or could mean for this project. So during this meeting, we would be so excited to hear from you about your experience and get your feedback on what it means to you. So now I'll hand it off to Rox to discuss more about this project and the task force.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And we do have a few questions, some of which have been answered in part by staff already in chat. So I know not everyone can see chat, so we will come back to those. But let's start with the first question from Councilwoman Sandoval. Could you go back and explain in simple language what a text amendment is?
That is a great question. So in simple terms, I called out that we have a thing called the Denver Zoning Code, which is essentially a giant document that's over 1,000 pages that provides the rules and regulations for essentially development, or again, what you can and cannot do with your property. We say a text amendment when we make any change to that. So when we make a change to the Denver Zoning Code, it could be as simple as we find a spelling error in the Denver Zoning Code, we want to make a change, or as complicated as adding an entire new zone district to the Denver Zoning Code. And I also have a furry friend that likes to bark in the background, so apologies for that. So again, a text amendment is identified as a change to the zoning code.
Great, thank you. So Monica Martinez had a question about housing diversity, and if we meant different types of housing, single family dwellings, duplexes, that sort of thing. And Andrew was able to get a response to that yes, it is the range of housing type, sizes, and numbers of bedrooms. Monica, did that answer your question? Great. And for those of you who can't see, Monica did a thumbs up on that, so we're good. Londell had a question about, I think it was slide number 3 in the maps. There were a number of different colors presented, and he was asking what the various colors meant. And again, thank you, Andrew. Andrew assured us that we will be coming back to those maps and those colors to really go in depth in terms of the methodology around the color coding for equity, all the measures that go into that sort of thing. So we will see those maps again with more explanation. Anna, you asked that perhaps we can add definitions for observers of supermajority and areas of change versus areas of stability. Thoughts on that from the team, or do we need more explanation about what the question is?
I was actually hoping that maybe, and if you could explain a little bit more what you mean there.
I might be getting ahead of myself, but just talking about, because I think I really appreciated like how you said 90% of redevelopments are within the zoning. And so just how the supermajority affects rezoning processes and how areas of change and area of stability can affect a rezoning process.
Yeah, so I would say at the second task force meeting, we are definitely aiming at talking a bit more about kind of rezonings, the analysis, the trends that we're seeing in Denver, and also look at peer city research, either at that meeting or even the third meeting. So we can dive into that and take note of it. And I think that we haven't quite used that terminology in terms of area of change or stability recently. I would just point to Blueprint Denver and some of our other plans that kind of identify certain things, including like the neighborhood context or future place types that should be happening in certain neighborhoods. But yeah, I would say we'll definitely dive more into the details and the data that we have in terms of rezonings and where they're occurring.
Great. And finally, there was a question about presentations and that sort of thing. Yes, indeed, for task force members, you will be sent the link to the recording as well as all presentations. For observers, they are also posted for the general public after meetings on the website. So we will absolutely always be sharing those with the hope that they will be useful as we go forward. Or if you happen to miss a meeting, you have an opportunity to both review the recording and listen to it as well as to see the presentations. Any other questions from task force members based on the presentation and the task ahead of us?
Roxanne, this is Claudia.
Yes, Claudia.
I have a question. In relationship to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm wondering if it's possible if we could invite children's voices to join this task force.
Great. So Claudia, great suggestion. And I will ask the CPD staff to go back and think about that and think about how we might do that either through membership in the task force or through many of the other forums that we have for community input as well.
If I could just follow up with that real briefly, when you consider it, there's a whole problem in equity, inclusion, and diversity of othering, and having them on another kind of thing really would be undermining the whole idea of equity and inclusion and diversity. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claudia. Any other comments? Monica.
Yeah, I think this is a comment. I try not to do too many comments. I try to ask questions, but I guess just clarify for me. So this work is really about improving the rezoning process. It's nothing about rezoning to solve things, outcomes. I guess I was all like, oh, we're going to be updating the zoning process to make the city more affordable. But no, we're truly just focused on the process of a rezoning and how to make that process more equitable in terms of engaging community to be part of a rezoning process. Am I making, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So yes, so the project is focusing on the rezoning process, and there's a lot of different components with that. And, as I mentioned before, a lot of development already happens, but there's still a decent amount of development that happens after rezoning. But when we look at kind of like our staff time and resources and who's involved, like this project could have a pretty big impact. So the other thing to consider with the rezoning process is there are opportunities where public is engaged. We want to make sure that is that the right type of engagement? Is that the right timing? And then, yeah, so again, it will focus on the rezoning process. I think it could mean a lot of different things at this point. And then maybe to answer a little bit of your question or concern of, is it just the process? Is that we will consider other additional requirements that could be linked to the rezoning process that might have or trigger some of the more equitable outcomes.
Great, and then I guess a follow-up, thank you. A follow-up question is, I imagine there's also like service, the city government service of a rezoning and the experience of the entity who's trying to go for the rezoning, that's a separate process, I guess. You know, how does a person or, you know, a developer go through the rezoning process, and how does that process improve on that end? That's not part of this process.
If I understand
I think I
you
used
correctly,
process like 7 million times, sorry.
yeah, if I understand you correctly, that is part of the process. So it could be a developer that wants to rezone their property. It could be an individual owner of a property. It could be representatives of developers. So kind of anyone that would go through the rezoning process will be affected by this project, because we will be updating or changing it as part of the project.
Okay, I guess just my follow-up then would be, you know, when you think about those focus groups, I think it's really important to have voices from those who will pursue a rezoning. Just because I mean, I know I'm a community sort of nonprofit, and I think many people on this call are community who may not then, they'll be sort of engaging or giving input to his rezoning process, but what about the customers of rezoning? You know what I mean? So I just want to make sure that's captured somewhere.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really good feedback. So this task force does have some of our best customers on it, and we will plan to look at, you know, how we create the focus groups and who's on it. I will tell you that, you know, we've planned to do focus groups with kind of maybe a two-prong approach, where we'll look at people that have that expertise, who would be maybe our customers, who's going through the process, and just have feedback on how that process could be improved. And then we'll also look at community members throughout Denver that would be impacted by rezonings themselves, and people that we should be reaching out to make sure that we're hearing about that, hearing from them, and that they are understanding what's going on and can give their input on future changes as well.
Are there other comments? Okay, we got 2 hands raised. Alfonso?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because you mentioned that like the process for city council wouldn't change as far as the way that they take on rezonings. But I'm just a little, I guess I'd like to understand more about if there's going to be some sort of criteria change, because right now as it stands, when they're going through a rezone process, there's like 5 criteria that CPD is supposed to look at, and if it meets those criteria, you advance it forward to city council, is the process right now. And I guess I'm just concerned, or I would like to know if we're actually going to tackle some of that criteria, how it's defined, because I've often seen, I think one of those criteria is like it improves, or I think something about like communication and outreach from the person to the neighbors or whatever it is, and it's very easy to check the box, and CPD hardly pushes back. So is that something that we're going to be able to challenge and change as part of this task force?
Yes. Yep. So that was one of the goals, is looking at updating the review criteria. So thank you for mentioning that. And also, I forgot to mention, we had sent a background report to the task force, which has probably too much detail about zoning and the rezoning process. But we can make sure that you get all the information you need to understand it. But Alfonso mentioned that there's 5 review criteria. So that's the criteria that we look at in terms of developing a recommendation of if a rezoning should move forward, or a recommendation to planning board. And that's kind of how planning board and city council evaluate the rezonings. So we will be looking at the review criteria and what changes could potentially happen to them.
Great questions, Councilwoman Sandoval, and then Joel.
Thank you. So as somebody who has brought forward rezonings for my community, this project is really important, because on Monday nights when we vote to Alfonso's point, the criteria, it has seemed antiquated, and it doesn't seem like it's been updated with our adopted plans. And so I know that it was a lot of information today to like a text amendment. If you don't use that word all the time, if you don't use rezoning, if you don't use the 5 criteria that city council, it gets so wonky. And so I would just like to offer my aide, Naomi is on this call, and we do our best to use, she's a planner, but we do our best not to use planner terminology when we're talking to our community about this process, because it does feel unequitable. It doesn't feel like my community in Northwest Denver has the resources and the access to be able to get the outcomes that they want. And that's why this task force and this process was so important to me, is because if you're from Denver or born and raised or grew up here, Northwest Denver has been so gentrified and has been one of the places where has experienced so growth, and a lot of egregious building forms, meaning like the slot home, have come out of Northwest Denver. And so although this only rezonings impact 10% of the city, in my personal life, I feel like they impact me every Monday night. And so that's not 10% of my life. That's every Monday night when we have a public hearing. This is something that I contemplate. And so although the city, we only see 10% of this, I just want to say on the record that it impacts my daily life, because I am the vice chair of the land use committee and I, vote on Monday nights. And so this is a big deal for all of us here. And as we get into these wonky terms, feel free to use Naomi in my office as a resource. We've led rezonings, we're working on them, and we can put them into simpler terminology sometimes. We all live in silos. And so I don't want to get you all going down the rabbit hole of trying to figure this out on your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval, both for the context of remembering the amount of time and energy that goes into, 50 or so rezonings a year, but also the offer of staff. Joel?
Yeah, thank you. Just to frame some of probably what you'll hear me say a lot throughout this task force, the rezoning process is hard, and changing the criteria, tinkering around, the things that we're going to be doing here are going to change it somewhat, but probably not fundamentally. If you're going to change what someone is allowed to do on their land, the zoning, there's going to be a careful process of reviewing it against adopted plans, whatever the criteria might be, going to planning board, going to city council. That takes 9 months to 12 months. And let me just talk about where I think the core of the inequity is. The core of the inequity is many people don't need to have a rezoning to go do on their land one of the things that we said in zoning they can do. It's great, they can just do. Others have to take 9 or 12 months, and time and money and barriers to not knowing the process that people with more money, with more resources, with lawyers can navigate, still taking the money and the time. Others without the money and the familiarity with it and the lawyers find it very hard to navigate. So I think we're going to be talking about when a rezoning is necessary, how to tweak that process. But I want us to keep in mind how kind of unfair it is that to do something that our neighborhood plan said should be doable, people have to invest at that level of 9 or 12 months just to get the zoning that our plans say they should have as a cost, and for many people, an insurmountable cost, an insurmountable barrier. So yes, we're in this box. We have a defined scope, but I want us to keep comparing what we're putting folks through to do what our plans say they should be able to do when they need a rezoning versus if they don't. Because the best case is when you don't need a rezoning. And that leads to discussions like, shouldn't city council apply a zoning that is consistent with adopted plans after we adopt new plans? That itself is outside of our scope, but certainly would lead to much more equitable outcomes for those facing right now the hurdle of rezoning.
Thank you for that comment, Joel. I think that's a good thing to bring up in terms of, so this is an implementation project, as I mentioned, and something that comes after we do our plan. So I think it's a good point to bring up that we have this planning effort and to look at other opportunities that our department can look forward into implementation and be a little more proactive or a little bit quicker in terms of what we're implementing to capture kind of the good input and feedback that we get at the time of the plan and to move it forward. So I think that's good, and we'll definitely take note of that. So thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments from task force members? And thank you as well to observers who are putting comments in and recommendations of resources as well. So we want to just take a couple of minutes and talk about how we work together as a task force. And we'll come back to this with a lot more depth at the next meeting. We want to have some breakout sections. Oh, I'm sorry, Brendan. I just saw your hand. Apologies.
Yeah. Just wanted to raise that, I think when we talk about equity and a lot of this has to do with representation. And so I just want to raise that I think one of the important things that this task force should also discuss is the process by which these task forces are created. And, who has the decision-making power in terms of who actually is represented on the task force is an important starting point in terms of how we make sure that we are creating an equitable process to be able to deliver equitable recommendations. And so, my understanding is that these task forces have a big voice in terms of what policy outcomes are recommended and what process outcomes are recommended. And so I think we need to also be looking at and have transparency in terms of how task forces are created. I just want to raise that point.
Sarah, any response from CPD on that? I think you tried to be very aware of that, but anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, so sorry, I was trying to answer some questions in the chat, but so looking at the transparency with how the task force was selected. So we did have selection criteria, and that is posted on the webpage. And so looking at that, and then so CB staff goes through the selection criteria, which is out there, and we evaluate kind of who's applied to be on the task force, who can be on it, and then reached out to those that we felt that fit the task force. Again, we realize that this can't be an inclusive group of everyone that we'd like to include. So at some point we did have to cut it off at about 25 members, but we want to make sure that we're also reaching out to those that we're interested in being on the task force and making sure that they can be involved how they can, either through focus groups or other opportunities. But if you have any suggestions about how we could make it more transparent or anything that we could do that address kind of your concerns about that, I guess, please let us know.
Great. Anything else? Okay, so for task force members, you were sent out some additional materials that we are going to, because of time, not cover at this meeting, but we will cover at the next meeting more in depth, which is about how we work together and making certain that there is room for everyone's voice, that as task force members, we agree to think about an alternative perspective as we listen to each other and being respectful of that in the room. We are going to hold that conversation until our next meeting, knowing that you received it in email, and also talk about longer term, how do we make recommendations, that sort of thing. Since we don't have to make recommendations for a little while, we're going to hold that to our next meeting in order to allow us to have some small group time so that we can have some conversation together, review some scenarios, and start to do some active participation and thinking about the rezoning process. So as we go into these small groups, Yvonne will be assigning folks into 3 small groups. For those of you who are observers, she will also randomly assign you to other groups. If you just give her a minute at the end, she will do that. And then when we're in those groups, we're going to use some Jamboards. And if you're not familiar with Jamboards are a tool we use to allow the introverts to have a chance to put up some stickies and get their thoughts out. Well, if you're like me and you're an extrovert, you're inclined to think you also have the opportunity to do some writing, but it gives the introverts a chance to also participate a little more actively, to collect some information from everyone. So we'll review the scenarios, have some Jamboard questions, and in each group, we will be asking for a volunteer to report out the conversation. There are 3 different scenarios that we will be working through. And just so everyone knows, we may not like what happens in the scenarios, but CPD staff have already made certain that they are following all the current guidelines and requirements of the city. So as we go into these scenarios, we'll review the scenarios, we'll have some Jamboard work, we'll have some group discussion, and we'll have some report outs. And we'll be in those small groups for about 20 minutes and then have about 3 minutes to report out. As we go into them, we will stop for a minute if you're not familiar with Jamboards and go over those as well. And for those of you who don't know how to use Jamboards, don't worry about it. If it doesn't work for you today, or if you're on the phone, you can get us your comments other ways in chat, that sort of thing, and your facilitators will help you do that. So the first step in this is Yvonne is going to send out the groups. If you can be certain to accept your group assignment, there's simply an alphabetical order. There's no science behind how people got assigned to groups with each other or with your facilitators either. So if we can go ahead, Yvonne, and what else does a group need to know in order to be able to do that?
Absolutely. You'll receive a notice from me that you will being sent to a breakout room. It'll either be scenario 2 or scenario 3. Scenario 1, we're going to stay put. We're going to stay right here just in case more people do decide to join us. Once you do that, I will send you back when your time is up and we will have a breakout discussion. I'm going to send everybody off. Have fun. Hello, if you are still here with us, you are part of scenario 1. Welcome. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Sarah.
Thank you. And I don't know if you're able to pull up the scenario on the screen.
I am not.
Okay, so just give me 1 second.
If you can screen share, please.
Sorry for the delay. I closed out of one of the documents. So if you guys want to talk amongst yourselves while I pull this up, sorry, it's taking me a little bit longer.
Some of your True of Me Denver facts made me really nostalgic in a good way. Reminds me why I love Denver.
I'm sorry, my Bronco web was maybe negative.
Was it?
I just wanted to say it's so fun being on this side. This is actually my first year not teaching, but all through COVID so I'm very familiar with Zoom. And so to your question, like, just talk amongst yourselves and there be silence, I know can be challenging, but so far I'm impressed to see you guys are using Jamboard and things like that. It looks like our society has gotten much better about virtual meetings and things. That's great.
All right, so thank you. Sorry, I was having some access issues with Jamboards. All right, now I will share my screen again. All right, so hopefully you guys can see this screen So what we're going to do here is we're going to I'm going to practice my reading skills, and I'll read to you a rezoning scenario. And then we have a couple questions to ask you about. So essentially the rezoning scenario is just to kind of trigger some thoughts and ideas and then get us thinking, but we're welcome to any ideas and other opinions you have about the rezoning process, similar to some comments that we're hearing before we broke out. So rezoning scenario number 1. Anita owns a building close to a light rail stop. The property is zoned for industrial uses, but now sits vacant. This area of the city is changing and new residential and commercial buildings are popping up. So a recent neighborhood plan recommended the area become a mixed-use hub with taller buildings so people could live and work near the rail station. As she researches the rezoning process and meets with planning staff, she feels confident a rezoning would meet the review criteria, and she submits an application to rezone to allow 8-story mixed-use buildings. Anita finds out some of her neighbors in nearby blocks are upset because they think a new building will bring traffic to the neighborhood, and they want to see community serving uses on the site. So again, we're looking if someone wants to report out at the end, and I'll move into some of the questions, or maybe I'll let Yvonne if you want to talk through some of that as well.
I'm sorry, Sarah, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Okay, so I guess right now we can move into questions. If you want me to repeat the rezoning scenario or share that again, but right now we'll move into some of the questions about the rezoning scenario. So the first one is, what challenges are there for the property owner, neighbors, tenants, or others in getting involved and understanding the process and ensuring a positive outcome? And at this point, so I think just a reminder, there's sticky notes.
Did you send the link out for the Jamboard? Is it in
Sorry.
the chat?
Yeah, Yvonne, are you able to send a link to the group for the Jamboard?
We are not we were not broken out into a group. We're still here. So let me see if this works. Give me one, bear with me.
While Yvonne is doing that, Yvonne and Sarah, I think you all do want to find someone to report back at the end. So maybe, is there a volunteer who's interested in doing that?
As an extrovert who's not shy, I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Sorry. So I just put something in chat. Is everybody seeing chat? Are people able to log in?
Yeah, I was able to get in.
For me. I haven't used Jamboard before though, so if you could explain it a little bit, that'd be appreciated.
Absolutely. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see there are 4 icons. Well, there are multiple icons, but the 4th icon down, the one that Sarah was highlighting, will create a sticky note for you. At the top, you'll see there are different color options. That's just the sticky color. It doesn't matter what color you use. You can be bright and colorful and pink, or you could just use the OG yellow color. But this is where we want you to write some text, let us know what your thoughts and feelings are, completely anonymous, so we don't know who posted what, and it will go directly onto that particular Jamboard once you hit save. It is the virtual version of putting stickies on a board. If you need us to reread the scenario or go back to the scenario so you'll have time to read it on your own, we can do that.
So I opened up the link now it's moving to the next page maybe.
Yes, there are 4 pages. One is the scenario and the additional 3 are the individual questions. We'll go through each of them individually.
And so the where I'm trying to put a sticky note, I can't see the question anymore. Is it only on the one you're sharing? Maybe so. I think I can figure this out. Sorry.
It's a great question. So I'm sharing my screen. I can stop sharing if that's confusing to anyone, but if you're able, pull up the link with the Jamboard, and then at the very top, if you still see my screen, there is kind of very small, but I guess it looks like two rectangles with arrows. If you click on those, it should go back and forth between questions and the scenario. So I'm hoping if people want to type in some of their comments for the first question, and then I can move on to the second and then the third question, if that's good.
Sarah, it looks like the text on the first page was deleted.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
I'll work on it from my end as well.
I guess someone really didn't like the scenario.
You were angry at the scenario.
This is Claudia. Do you mind rereading the scenario one more time and then the question as well?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so you guys can hear me. I'll read it again. I have it pulled up kind of in a separate document that I'll just read. All right, so the scenario, I think we use Alex owns a building close to a light rail stop. The property is zoned for industrial uses, but now it sits vacant. The area of the city is changing and new residential commercial buildings are popping up. A recent neighborhood plan recommended the area become a mixed-use hub with taller buildings so people could live and work near the rail station. So as she researches the rezoning process and meets with planning staff, she feels confident rezoning would meet the review criteria and applies to rezone to allow the 8-story mixed-use building. But they find out that some of the neighbors in nearby blocks are upset because they think a building might bring traffic and they would prefer to see community serving uses on the site. So the example that we're just trying to portray here is the fact that I think people are seeing rezonings come through and there's maybe things that they would like to see with future development, or maybe they didn't really feel as part of the process as they'd like to be. Well, I think there's some great comments. I like the comment about helping adjacent neighbors understand what the neighborhood plan recommends for the property and, you know, potential reasons for more density. So this is an issue that kind of we see sometimes where there are, you know, we go through the neighborhood planning process or citywide planning process, and we use those as part of the criteria for rezoning. So we look to see if a rezoning meets the criteria, including does it meet what we say in the plan, and use that to look at whether maybe a rezoning could be approved or maybe not approved. Should we go on to the next question?
Does anyone feel like they need more or want to have a discussion about question 1 regarding the scenario?
I'm in the middle of typing a note. Can I have a minute, please?
Sure.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Oh yeah, go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, so I'm not able to see what everybody is typing and writing and what their thoughts are. And it would be very helpful if when they're all compiled, you have them in front of you, if someone could read them.
Yeah. So
yeah, great, thank you.
Some of them, yeah, I'll read some of them. And I think when we do the report back to a larger group, we'll also kind of give a summary of what we've heard. So some of the things that people are writing about in terms of the challenges for property owners, neighbors, and tenants, in terms of understanding the process and ensuring certain outcomes. So some of them were saying challenges for neighbors could be understanding if the rezoning applicant is going to develop the project or sell the project or property once it goes through the rezoning process. I think that's a great comment. That's something we see. So that's something I want to bring up is that we call something a speculative rezoning when it's a rezoning that comes in where someone might rezone their property, but may not have the intention to develop and could potentially sell the property later with that new entitlement. Other challenges were identified were lack of requirements for neighborhood preference so that local residents can benefit from the development, or educating the neighbors that density in your transit reduces traffic and helps reduce CO2 emissions, or potentially challenges for tenants is negotiating with with the person rezoning to be able to move into the new development. That's actually a really interesting one. Other things that were written were understanding what transportation demand management is and what calls for that at that site. I think that's a great thing. As a city, we're trying to encourage more transportation demand management plans or TDM. So that's something when we're considering development near transit areas. Other things were how to do good outreach and communicate well with neighbors. And if the rezoning applicant has a day job, this can take a lot of time, which is very true. And we want to make sure that all voices are at the table. So I think that comments in reference that when we start the rezoning process and talk to an applicant, we encourage that applicant to communicate with the community, to do public outreach. But as that comment refers to that, someone that's going through the rezoning process may have another job and they may not just have the time to do public outreach. So we need to think about what does public outreach mean? How is it done? And how can we make sure that all the voices that we want to hear from are at the table? I may direct people if you want.
I was just going to add, this is Caitlin, that was my comment. I just, I wrote that from, I am an attorney, I represent people in rezonings, and I often will get involved when I have kind of a single property owner who doesn't have the time and capacity to do all of that, right? And I think Joel sort of spoke to that. Well, obviously it keeps me busy. I think ideally we'd all love a world where someone could do that on their own and not have to necessarily hire me, right? And so I think, but often when I work with those property owners, they want to do a robust process. They want to talk to other neighbors. They just don't know how or who the right people are or who the right voices are, and kind of finding that and is it the RNO or is it really the adjacent neighbors, or is it maybe a different organization that's not the RNO registered neighborhood organization. And so I think I like to always think of the best of intent, and they really want, I think most of them want a good process. They just don't know how to do it. And I think we all keep working at it, right? To make sure that all voices are heard. But it's very common that you end up at the hearing and somebody says, I didn't know about this, or, and you think, gosh, what could we have done differently to make sure that they were at the table? So.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. And I added another comment to kind of build on what you were saying. If you guys want to talk through your comments, I'm happy to write post-it notes as well, because I think it's great for you guys to have a conversation about this as well. I could read a few more, and then I want to make sure that we move on to some of the other questions in case that triggers some other responses in terms of how you respond to this rezoning scenario.
Hi, I don't see my comment up there, but we had recently had a request through our RNO and it was turned down completely. And the poor people, I think, were totally unaware that they couldn't even consider an ADU where they were planning it. And it's unfortunate they already hired somebody and went to a lot of expense to be totally disappointed. So I would like to see that kind of scenario not happen to a bunch of people when they hear ADU in Denver and realize how little of the area is actually zoned for it in the first place.
So I think to summarize, there's this applicant that came in and essentially they didn't know everything that they could do with their property or what's current zoning allowed. And that was kind of one of the issues. It wasn't clear to them.
Yeah, and we kind of approved it and then found out that even though we would approve it, it wasn't allowed in the first place. So the RNO wasn't even aware of what they could do or contribute to the process. So I like to see that kind of situation not happen over and over again, that's for sure.
Are you just, I just want to make sure I even like report this out correctly. Are you saying it would be good if just regular citizens of Denver understood the zoning codes better? Maybe?
Yeah.
Like what their house is even zoned for, what they're allowed to put there, what their neighbors are, what their neighborhood. Yeah, just a better understanding of zoning. Yeah.
Because when you read in the paper, you think it's allowed all throughout Denver, and I just looked at the map and how little of Denver is even allowed it. So I can understand some frustrations, like people thinking, oh, this is an opportunity for my mother-in-law to live with us comfortably, and then find out it's not at all possible.
Allie, this is Caitlin. What I often, and I'm curious, I think Joel commented on this earlier, I often recommend that pre-application for that reason, because I think it makes them sit down with city staff first thing to find out if they could do an ADU, for example. And so before they spend the time with the neighborhood or others, to sit down with staff and just get the lay of the land, if you will, and kind of a gut check. And I'm curious if, because I know Joel asked the question in the comments earlier, if the kind of increase in number of pre-applications that don't actually result in actual rezoning applications is maybe part of that, is that is a process that's successful in the sense that it allows someone to come in pretty affordably and say, here's what I'm thinking, and very early have that conversation with the city and understand if it's possible or not. And maybe that's why some of them don't proceed, as they find out, oh gosh, it wouldn't work or whatever.
Yeah, that is true. We do get a decent amount of pre-applications that come in where I think people are testing or trying to understand what they can do with their current property now, and maybe what potential zone districts are out there that they could rezone into. And I think that is part of why we get some people dropping off, is because they do find out that it might maybe be unlikely that they could get through the rezoning process, or they find out like, oh, hey, the requested zone district I'm going after, it just won't meet the review criteria, like maybe meet some. And so just talking through with rezoning applicants at that stage and making sure they have a very clear understanding, I think is important, or at least what I'm hearing right now.
Hi, Yvonne and Sarah. I want to highlight, we have less than 1 minute left. If there's anyone on the task force who hasn't had a chance to speak yet and wants to.
And if you can get off a screen share, Sarah, just so that when people join us, they won't be met with our scenario.
You know, this is Bruce. I'm going to say something real quick, tying into a lot of this discussion, is that I've done a lot of rezonings where I've been working in the community, and the city is kind of absent from the process, and that puts the onus on the property owner or the developer to try to educate the community on the whole process and what's going on and what plan support is, or all those kind of things. And often that isn't being done from a position of trust or respect. And so maybe an equitable idea might be if the city was kind of could be more of a mediator or an arbiter of the process, and when the applicant's working in the community, it would lend some legitimacy and predictability to the process that is lacking today in some instances.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope that was insightful and that everybody had time for some good discussion.
Okay, Yvonne, have we called everyone back yet?
We have.
Fabulous. Okay, so hopefully people just got a little more of a taste of some of the scenarios that will come before us. Also got a little bit of a chance to listen to each other. And it was absolutely not anywhere near enough time. Sally, we completely agree with you on that, but we didn't want to skip this for today, but wanted to start the opportunity. We will have more time for breakout groups going forward. But to Monica's comment, it really was to help us start to get our feet wet and to also demonstrate the complexity of the challenges ahead of us. So on that note, can I turn to group number 1? And for Sarah and Yvonne, who's reporting out from your group, and would you mind going first?
Hi, guys. Group 1 has been a great discussion. Yeah. And Sally, just in my experience, breakout rooms never have enough time. It's like my favorite parts of Zoom meetings. But so does everyone know our scenario? Do I just
could you please go over the scenario real quick?
Could you do that, Yvonne, for me? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I only see the first line.
Sure, absolutely. Our scenario was regarding accessibility. And we have a person who is trying to build a building close to a light rail station. And as she gets ready to do the rezoning process application, she realizes that a lot of community members are actually not in favor of having all of this new traffic in their neighborhood. That was where we started.
So the question was, again, how does, what are the challenges for basically everyone involved? The person doing the rezoning and the neighbors, and the people even living in the current development. So some ideas or challenges we discussed were how can the city themselves get more involved? It's typically on the shoulders of the person owning the property to do the community outreach. How can someone who is working a full-time job do a better job in community outreach? Going with positive intent, a lot of people tend to really want to do a good job with this, but don't have the tools to reach everyone in the community. Challenges can also be how to educate the neighborhood surrounding ideas of density near transit, how that can affect traffic, and actually hopefully reduce it. And then in general, just how can community members have a better understanding of what their zoning is, what their property allows to be built, and what their neighborhood allows to be built. We have a lot of sticky notes here. I hope I didn't miss any really big thought. Yvonne, if you wanted to, anybody in my group, if you guys would like to add something, you're welcome to.
I think we captured that there were minimal accessibility points, discussion about ADUs, and kind of what that entails and what parts of the city are allowed to have ADUs. Just as we're talking about creation of new buildings, bringing in new buildings, and what that represents for the community.
So there was a question about whether or not we could share the slides at the same time. We're happy to do that. We'll also have them online at the end when we'll clean them up a little bit and post them, but this allows us to see everyone right now. So if groups can report out saying you'd like to show the slides or not, but we will get them to everyone afterwards, we promise. Anything else from your report out? Okay, let's go to group number 2, which is the group that I was in. And Erin, would you like me to share slides? Great, Erin, you're already sharing slides. Perfect. Erin, you might be muted. We can't hear you at this point.
So sorry.
There we
I'm
go.
so proud of the sharing that, and okay, I will start over. So yes, hi, scenario 2. So our group was talking about neighborhood impact of potential rezoning. And I was just starting to read the prompt, which is Marcus's family has owned a neighborhood church on a corner lot in a residential neighborhood for many years. The church has now sat vacant for a year with no interest for new tenants to use it as a church again. He would like to expand the uses allowed on his property to accommodate new uses that will allow the building to thrive again and not sit vacant. When Marcus asks the city what he can do with his property, he learns his property is zoned to not allow the uses he envisions, but instead is zoned to allow only residential uses. And so when we went through the various questions, and we'll show here, so what are the challenges here for the property owner, neighbors, tenants, and others in getting involved? And there are a lot of common themes across the different prompts or different questions. But in terms of challenges, it was really about unclear process and lack of clarity. There's certainly timing concerns and cost concerns, a need for translation of the zoning code, and also a navigator through the process. So kind of what more can the city provide to help with that? That there's not an easy way to do outreach. And also that this said, how do we understand the process and ensure a positive outcome? And we expressed concern about what does positive outcome mean? That's really subjective. Who positive for who? And that I think we'll get into the equity question at the end. So the second part was what steps or who else should be included in the process. For this, again, it was a lot about city support, particularly around community engagement and outreach to neighbors. Certainly RNOs should be included, but also just thinking anyone who's related to the proposed use in the area, and thinking about the involvement of the local council people. At what stage are they involved in the process? But in particular, just who really is going to be directly impacted by the decision, by the rezoning decision in this location. And then finally, how else would we incorporate equity into this rezoning scenario? Again, it's really about who will be most impacted in thinking about equitable outcomes, eliminating or thinking a lot about timing and streamlining of steps in the process, and particularly when this is someone on behalf of a family, they're not experts in doing this, how to kind of eliminate some of the steps in the process for things that would really be for community benefit. And again, about having navigators for regular people trying to get through this process. So making equity in accessing the process and getting through the process. And then we also looked at equity from the perspective of the uses. So what of the zoning that's there, and also what it could become, looking at that in the context of what are the other needs in the neighborhood, what else is already there of businesses, and trying to make sure that there's some gap filling. So I think that was our report from group 2.
Thank you very much. Any questions for group 2? So we're starting to see some themes emerge, even across the various scenarios. So let's look at the third group. And Sabrina, who's reporting out from your group?
Londell is.
Great. Londell?
Certainly, just one moment, please. There we go. There's circles here now, but sure, cool. So it appears that we all made the same or had the same questions, but the scenario that we had was that there was a nonprofit organization that was located in a neighborhood, and they rented out their ground floor space with tenants up above. The rezoner wanted to come, or there was a development one proposed to come in and rezone it to a 3-story building. So it's really just kind of discussing this process. They're reaching out to the registered neighborhood organization to share the proposed rezoning, and they agreed to provide, the RNO agreed to provide a letter in support of the application if the developer would sign a neighborhood agreement that addresses some of their concerns about building design and hours of operations for new buildings. So going through how we responded, and I'm going to encourage my team members to chime in even at this point, because it seems that we had a group of introverts in our group. Pull my notes over here. So one thing that we wanted to say is that that registered neighborhood organizations don't always act in everyone's best interest. And that can be seen just by who's sitting there, just by looking at them. Amanda, I will definitely second your motion. I live in your district and I've lived there for 15 years and I have born and raised in Park Hill, and I never had gone to the West Side unless I needed to visit relatives. And now that I live on the West Side, I am really kind of shocked at who represents our neighborhood, because there are very few, if maybe a couple of people who are of Latin, Hispanic, Mexican descent on that neighborhood organization. I watched recently a conversation about a development that wants to go up, and there were people that didn't represent the neighborhood as I've seen it and as I've experienced it there. So we have to realize that, and also there were members of the RNO who were also connected to the developer that lived in our neighborhood. So we have to understand that piece as well. There was a point brought up about building for individuals, for building things for people to come into the neighborhood and not building for the people that are in the neighborhood. And I think that's a key point in, again, what I've been seeing in our neighborhood, in destroying single family homes and building these things that are hideous. Excuse, don't censor myself very well. And then we have the understanding that rezoning is a project specific, that rezoning is not, when something gets rezoned, it's for one thing and not necessarily for an entire neighborhood. And I think there is some misunderstanding about exactly, if something is rezoned, it's the entire neighborhood, it's the entire business district, and so on and so forth. Who should be included in the process? I think it's a great idea. Someone recommended to have a third party or an ombudsman, but definitely a third party, someone who really doesn't have a great investment in the outcome, but that can serve as a communicator. Who are these future residents that are coming in? What are their intentions? And I know that's kind of maybe somewhat impossible, particularly if it's a residential platform. But I think someone just raised a good example that if it's Denver housing, or if it's some developer from New York, then we can kind of guess who might be living there. At least the socioeconomic structure of someone who might be living there, not the individual person. And so we can have a conversation about what are those expectations of those individuals, who are they, and how are they going to nurture the neighborhoods. Then we have, and then obviously existing residents and perhaps even surrounding neighborhoods. Again, referencing the meeting that I witnessed when the developer was asked to give greater notice to the residents in the neighborhood. All four of them just paused and just were very hesitant of saying, well, we do that in the final process with the sign, and we're like, well, can't you send out a flyer? Well, the flyers would just go to the owners of the properties, and so they were just really reticent at letting people know what they want to do, and so creating that effort of enforcing them to do something and communicate. Lastly, incorporating equity. Early community meetings. Again, I think this also goes back to the RNO participation, in that the RNO should be responsible in making certain that these community meetings are inclusive and widespread and are accessible. Not everyone has Zoom in their home. Not everyone even knows what Zoom is. And so there's that to be said. Maybe looking and working with a neighborhood impact organization or some other research body that can assess what will happen to this organization if said development happens. And so while it's not, we can't predict the future, but it's good to have some guesses around things like that. And then lastly, reviewing again the neighborhood organization membership. We need to be cognizant of who our representatives are. And if we see things, then we should speak out about who is representing our area that we're discussing. And so that is all I have.
Great, thank you so much, Londell. And if you weren't watching the chat, there's lots of feelings and thinking about RNOs and their influence and their inclusivity and how their role is. And I'm sure we'll keep coming back to that. So I just want to acknowledge that we have some very, very different perspectives and some very, very different experiences about involvement, inclusion in RNOs, effectiveness of RNOs and recognizing their role in this process. So just want to highlight that we are seeing that absolutely, and we'll keep coming back. Thank you to our fabulous 3 reporters. We really, really appreciate it. And I can't believe how fast time has gone for us today, but we know it's almost 5 o'clock already. And even knowing that, we still didn't have enough time in our breakout group. So Sally, I think it was Sally who said that, want to acknowledge that it wasn't enough time, but really appreciate hearing the cross section about how many people had similar thoughts about what is a positive outcome, what is equity, how do we think about navigators and helping people get through the process. How do we think about outreach and how we make certain that works for who all is really impacted and what does it mean to be impacted? So this was just a taste to help us get more into thinking. And as we move into close, we have a couple of things where we'd love to have people's comments if you were able in chat. And otherwise, Claudia, I know you're on the phone, so I will ask you this. Yes, the chat comments, by the way, are saved, those that are directed at everyone and given both for posting as well as back to the staff for you all. So they are there as well as all of the documents. As we close out, please let us know in chat if there are any additional data points that you would have found helpful for today going forward that you haven't mentioned already. And second, for us as your facilitators, if there are things you would have wished we would have done differently or that you really liked, if you would also let us know that. We'll try to repeat the things that you liked and the things that you wish we'll try to adjust going forward. So we appreciate feedback from task force members on I liked, I wished, and if you have data requests at this point, that would be great to have. And with that, I'm going to turn to Yvonne. And Yvonne, please remind us of some of the upcoming meetings that people should have received a calendar invite for, if you're a task force member, and where we certainly hope that observers will join us as well. And then Sarah, will go to you for final thoughts from CPD.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for your time today. Again, I'm Yvonne Miranda, and you should have received calendar invites from Roxanne White, but really they're coming from me. Our upcoming meeting will be January 26th, and that is the orientation, which is actually an educational session, and I'll let Sarah kind of delve into that a little bit more. And moving forward, starting in February, our task force meetings will be on the 4th Wednesday of every month during this exact same time. If you have not received a calendar invite, or if you're having issues with receiving the link, feel free to send me an email. I'll put it in the chat and I'll make sure that it gets resolved. Sarah?
No, hold on one second. I said I was going to do something and then I promptly didn't do it. So I apologize for that. But Claudia, you are on the phone. Anything that you would like to convey in terms of I liked or I wished in terms of the meeting today?
Right. Thank you so much, Roxanne. I didn't mention this earlier because I just wanted to see how things went with this group, but I wanted to let everybody know that I'm blind. And so it would be really helpful if when someone starts to speak, if you could state your name like Stacy or Anna or whomever. And I think that would be all I need and it would be real helpful. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and thank you for sharing that with the group. And this voice is from Rox, your facilitator, and I will do my best to also remind people that that's very helpful. Sarah, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, so final thoughts. I just want to thank everyone for sharing all of their feedback and sharing it openly and honestly. I know, this is the first meeting. We'll have many more. There'll be other opportunities for input and feedback, but I just want to appreciate the idea that you're bringing forward the key issues that we should be looking into. I know sometimes it can be a difficult conversation. So again, I appreciate for you bringing that open and bringing it and openly bringing it to us. I think that's very helpful for us because we can't figure out how to solve things if we don't know what the issues are. So let's continue to talk about that. And again, I'm going to share my screen very quickly just as kind of a visual really quick, but as Yvonne was saying, our next meeting is actually an optional task force meeting. So it's called the task force orientation, but what it really is a more in-depth educational session about what zoning is and the rezoning process. We couldn't cover everything in this meeting today. I think Robin mentioned that they would have loved maybe a little bit more in-depth information about what the rezoning process is. We do plan to go into that way more in depth in that orientation or that educational session meeting. If you are not able to attend the meeting or just don't want to, we will also record it and we'll have that on the webpage as well. And that will be available for the broader community to look at. So we're kind of calling it like the zoning 101 and the rezoning 101 session. After that, Yvonne mentioned we'll have our task force meetings the fourth Wednesday of every month. So that means February 23rd from 3 to 5, we'll have our second meeting. And then we're also looking at convening focus groups soon. So we'll get more information out about that. And then lastly, if you want to spread the word about the project, or if you're just curious about other information updates, we do have our project webpage that we've mentioned. The quick way to get to it is denvergov.org/equity in rezoning. That's our shorthand version of the webpage. So we'll be posting things there. And as well as we'll reach out to you about when we have things up on the webpage and kind of a capture of the chat and a meeting summary. We'll let you know when we have that, and that will also be posted to the webpage as well. So I think that's all I have. And if there's any final comments or if Rox has any final thoughts, I'm open to it. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. We will be sending out to task force members and posting on the website. Give us a couple of days to get all of the Jamboards cleaned up so that we've got all the stickies in place so everyone can see them, and we'll get you the presentations as well. And at this point, we're going to thank you again for attending. We will stop recording and feel free to drop off. The CPD staff have a couple of seconds. We'll just wrap up with them and the Strategy with Rocks team. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.